What is the judgment that you have about the possibility for success for this round of peace process?
Thank you. Well, I think the gentleman who is presiding over these talks, the UN Special Envoy, Staffan de Mistura, has been wise in talking down expectations of an immediate political breakthrough. He has even correctly talked down expectations of having the different delegations in the room together. So what the UN envoy is doing is what is called proximity talks. He is going from one delegation room to another, conducting separate meetings for now. And I think, if I may, the test of whether we are seeing progress in these talks will be in the initial period. And that initial period, maybe for a period of months, will be whether we are seeing any progress on extension of ceasefires, ending of sieges on civilians, greater access for humanitarian aid and assistance for civilians in different controlled areas of Syria, and perhaps prisoner swaps and releases. Later on, we can talk about a big political breakthrough, but, and it's important to stress this, this is not just the job of the UN envoy with the different delegations in Geneva. For any chance of any progress, he will need the support of the different regional actors and international actors who are backing different sides of this conflict to apply pressure.
Is there any chance that there is any opportunity to be achieved?
First off, I agree with Mr. Levy in his comments about downplaying expectations. He gave a list of things that are to be desired, access for humanitarian goods, ceasefires, things like that. I think, however, that the prospects of any of those being achieved are very, very small. There is not a balance of forces on the ground. Both sides want to keep fighting. There is no prospect that the opposition would live with an Assad in power, nor any prospect that Iran, Russia, or Assad himself would agree to leave power. So this is going to be a conflict playing out on the ground for some time to come.
Ambassador Hua, you have a very good knowledge about the region after serving as the Chinese ambassador to Iran. The question is, at this moment, we see different sides not looking at one another as the candidates for any discussion. For example, from the Syrian side, the foreign minister is the delegation head. But from the opposition side, in fact, what the Syrian government consider as terrorist groups and also military defectors were among those in the opposition participating in the so-called negotiations. Will there be any chance that these sides are going to talk to one another?
You see, the talks are between two sides. The one side is very clear from the Syrian government led by Bashar Assad. But the other side is very ambiguous to everybody because there is big disunity between the oppositions. And actually nobody knows who is the opposition. And somebody are living in Istanbul, somebody are living in Damascus, and they have different views over the issues. So first of all, the opposition, they have to unify their own lines and to have the unified idea to talk with the government of Bashar Assad. Of course, they don't talk in the same room. They have indirect talks through the UN Special Envoy. Even that, still there is big problems among the opposition themselves. But this time we have seen a very slim hope that they can make some progress on very small steps. Even that we will appreciate.
As to who the oppositions are, who are likely to be accepted as part of the opposition by all the players, not to mention the Assad government. So is, as Ambassador Hua in Beijing said here, we have to streamline the opposition. Everybody agree as to who the oppositions are before we go to the next step of talk?
Well, I agree that would make it easier, but I don't believe that it's possible. I think right now we have, as you said, very disparate opposition groups that are very self-driven. different Sunni tribes, ISIS, different religious degrees of religion as a party, those who would rather be secular and democratic, those who focus more on the military, geographically disparate. It is very, very complicated. And you have, as you said, outside actors who are supporting various of these groups in different ways. Obviously, ISIS is pulling in a lot of its own support, but then you have Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Turkey who are supporting different groups on the opposition side, not to mention the United States. And you also have, on the side of the government and the Shia, you have Iran, you have Russia, you have Assad. And that is also producing continuing attacks and sieges against civilian populations, which is radicalizing that population so that they are unwilling to really work with the government. I really don't see that there is much prospect at all of pulling this together at the moment.
What do you make of the bigger so-called geopolitical forces in the play? Where is the credibility of them? That is also a question urgently need to be answered, Mr. Levy.
Well, I think the bigger question of their respective credibility will be played out not only in Syria, but in a variety of different arenas across the world. I think the challenge in Syria, and this is very much, this particular process right now, I think has very much been driven by the Russians on one side and the Americans on the other. There is a bigger group, of which China is a member, by the way, of 20 states and institutions who form a new thing called the Vienna Group or the International Syria Support Group. All of them will need to use their leverage if there's going to be an outcome. But I think the real question here at the moment is, now that the Russian side has taken a much greater degree of ownership, of military ownership, of supporting, saving the government in Damascus, the Assad government, will Russia use that role as leverage in order to get the Syrian government to bring real deliverables, real things that it will do to the negotiating table? And if that is the case, can the other side reciprocate and get the opposition to accept compromises, to accept necessary conditions that will be needed to make progress? That's not only a job for America, that is also the job of the regional actors, which you mentioned, who are on the opposition side, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and others.
Among all of these entangled clues, Ambassador Hua, do you agree with what Mr. Levy point, which is let's start with the role of Russia? Is that where it can start with and it should be starting with?
I think the hope of a political process just happened after the Russian military intervention in the Syria war. After that, Bashar al-Assad is going to stay. This is the problem, because from the very beginning, led by the United States, all the Western countries, they announced that Bashar al-Assad is illegal. But now nobody is saying about that, because Bashar al-Assad, whoever, he's going to stay. And this is now status quo. Whatever, even the opposition, they have to talk, although it's indirectly, but they have to talk with Bashar al-Assad's representative in Geneva.
What is likely to be the role of the United States, particularly you are already at the election season and the current president is leaving the office soon. So will there be significant role for the U.S.? Is it still going to play a counterbalance role, let's just say vis-a-vis another big player, Russia, on the issue?
Can I take a step back from this a little bit and just look at a couple of factors here? There's a difference between having a peaceful settlement and countries pursuing their interests to achieve a gain. And I think what we're seeing here in the case of Russia is it is supporting the Assad regime. It is working with Iran. They are trying to achieve a position, which is to maintain the Assad government in power and control over Syria, and to drive out any other armed opposition groups. That's a military, a strategic, a political objective. What others would want, such as the United States, is to see a solution, a diplomatic settlement where the fighting stops, and then every party can be represented in some way and have some say over its own governance. That is not what the Russians are looking for, what the Iranians or Assad are looking for. Frankly, some of the groups the United States is working with are not looking for that either. They want to keep fighting the Assad regime. So I see the U.S. being visible in terms of both